Rain has a strange way of dragging memories back to the surface. Even now, at 28, sitting alone in my Boston apartment, I can't hear it without feeling that night crawl up my spine. The windows are fogged city lights blurring into streaks of white and red, and on my kitchen table sits an envelope I haven't opened yet. Thin paper, cheap ink, nursing home letterhead. My father's handwriting. 13 years. That's how long it's been since I last heard from him. 13 years since he shoved me out into an October storm and decided I no longer mattered. Back then, I was 15 years old. No coat. No phone. No money. Just a school backpack with algebra homework, inside, and sneakers that were already soaking through as rain slammed against the porch. I can still hear his voice, sharp and final. Get out of my house. I don't need a sick daughter. The door slammed. The deadbolt clicked. And that was it. I stood there for a moment, staring at the door like it might reopen if I waited long enough. Like someone would suddenly realize a mistake had been made. But the house stayed silent, warm lights glowing inside while I stood outside, invisible. I hadn't even been allowed to grab my phone from my bedroom desk. This was 2011. Payphones technically existed somewhere, but what 15-year-old carries quarters? I spent my allowance on band posters and snacks after school, not survival plans. So I did the only thing my body knew how to do. I started walking. 7 miles. That's how far my grandmother's house was. 7 miles through freezing rain, traffic splashing past me like I didn't exist, my clothes clinging to my skin heavier with every step. I didn't think about distance. I didn't think about time. I just focused on putting one foot in front of the other because stopping felt worse. But before I tell you how that night ended, you need to understand how it started. Earlier that day, everything felt normal. I came home from school thinking about dinner, homework, and the algebra test I just aced. I remember feeling proud of myself, like maybe, finally, I was doing something right. The second I stepped inside, I knew something was wrong. My father was standing in the living room, red-faced, shaking. In one hand, a stack of cash. In the other, empty pill bottles. His knuckles were white like he'd been gripping them for hours. Behind him stood my older sister, Karen. 19 years old. Perfect posture. Tears carefully placed in her eyes. The concerned, heartbroken expression she wore so well. And behind her, hovering near the kitchen doorway, was our stepmother, Jeline, arms crossed, lips pressed together, saying nothing. That was her specialty. My father didn't let me set my backpack down. He started shouting accusations like bullets. I'd been stealing from his wallet, buying pills, hiding them in my room. Karen had found the evidence. Cash in my dresser, bottles in my closet, text messages that supposedly proved I was dealing drugs. I tried to speak. I tried to explain. But I could tell instantly he wasn't listening. His decision had already been made. Karen stood there, playing her role perfectly, saying she'd tried to help me, that she didn't want to tell him, that she was just worried about her little sister destroying her life. I saw it, though. That flicker in her eyes. Satisfaction. My father grabbed my arm hard enough to bruise and dragged me toward the door. He picked up my backpack and threw it at my chest like I was trash he couldn't wait to get rid of. Rain hammered the porch as he shoved me outside. And just like that, my childhood ended. What my father didn't know, what Karen hadn't planned for, was that throwing me into that storm didn't erase me. It exposed everything. Because 3 hours later, a phone rang. And when my father heard what the police had to say, his face went completely white. But by then, it was already too late. Because someone had found me. And she wasn't just anyone. She was the worst possible person for Karen's lies to run into. The woman who stopped her car that night had spent decades dismantling lies exactly like Karen's, and she knew immediately that what she was looking at wasn't an accident. By the time I reached the first-mile marker, the rain had soaked through everything. My sweatshirt clung to my skin like a second, heavier layer. My sneakers squelched with every step, the thin canvas doing absolutely nothing to keep the cold out. Cars rushed past me on Route 9, headlights flaring, tires hissing through puddles, none of them slowing down. I don't blame them. To them, I was just a shape on the side of the road, something uncomfortable to notice, easier to ignore. After the second mile, my fingers stopped hurting. At the time, I thought that was a good sign. I didn't know that numbness wasn't relief. It was danger. My teeth were chattering so hard my jaw ached, but my body kept moving on autopilot. Grandma Dorothy's house stayed fixed in my mind like a lighthouse. 7 miles, then 6, then 5. Each mile felt longer than the last. I kept replaying my father's words in my head. I don't need a sick daughter. Over and over. It's strange what sticks with you when you're freezing and scared. Not the shouting, not the accusations, just that one sentence, heavy and final like a verdict. By mile 3, my legs started to wobble. Not pain, weakness. The kind that makes your knees feel like they might fold without warning. My thoughts got foggy, like I was walking through someone else's dream. I remember thinking it would be nice to sit down for just a minute, just to rest. That was hypothermia talking. But I didn't know that then. I remember a mailbox ahead, leaning slightly to the side, reflective numbers flashing in my headlights. I told myself I'd lean against it, just catch my breath, then I'd keep going. Grandma's house was only 3 more miles. I didn't make it to the mailbox. My knees buckled without warning. The gravel came up fast, scraping my palms as I fell. The cold rushed in all at once, sharp and absolute. I tried to push myself back up, but my arms didn't cooperate. That's the last clear memory I have. After that, everything went black. 3 hours earlier, my father had slammed the door and locked it behind me. 3 hours later, his phone rang. The voice on the other end was calm, professional, and completely uninterested in excuses. "Mr. Walls, this is Officer Daniels with County Police. Your daughter has been found unconscious on Route 9. Early stage hypothermia. She's being transported to County General Hospital." Pause. "And sir, Child Protective Services has been notified. A caseworker is already on site. We'll need you to come down and explain why a 15-year-old was walking alone in a storm with no coat and no phone." According to hospital staff, my father didn't say a word at first. He just went pale. Karen was standing right next to him when he took that call, and for the first time, her perfect mask slipped just for a second. Not fear. Calculation. I woke up under fluorescent lights. The smell hit me first. Antiseptic, industrial cleaner, and something faintly metallic. A stiff hospital blanket was tucked around me, scratchy but warm. My fingers tingled painfully as sensation crept back in. That's when I noticed I wasn't alone. A woman sat beside my bed, legs crossed, a paperback resting in her lap. Silver hair pulled back neatly, reading glasses perched low on her nose. She looked like someone's grandmother, the kind who carried tissues and hard candies in her purse. But her eyes were sharp, alert, watching everything. She noticed me stir and immediately leaned forward. "There you are," she said gently. "Welcome back." She handed me a cup of coffee, hospital cafeteria coffee, the kind that tastes like regret and burnt hope. "It's awful," she added, "but it's warm." I laughed. I didn't mean to. It just came out. a short, broken sound that surprised both of us. She smiled like she'd been waiting for that moment. "My name is Gloria Hensley," she said, "and I think you have a story to tell." Something about the way she said it, no accusation, no doubt, made my chest tighten. So I told her. Everything. The accusations, the planted evidence, the years of small, invisible sabotage, the way my father had already decided I was guilty before I even opened my mouth. Gloria didn't interrupt. She didn't question me. She just listened. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she said the words that changed my life. "I believe you." I felt something inside me crack open. She leaned closer, "And I'm going to help you prove it." What I didn't know then, what Karen definitely didn't know, was that Gloria Hensley wasn't just some kind stranger. She had spent 35 years working for Child Protective Services. She had seen every lie, every manipulation, every version of a parent who chose comfort over truth. And when she found me unconscious on the roadside that night, she recognized exactly what she was looking at. Abandonment. And she wasn't about to let it slide. While I lay in that hospital bed, police, CPS, and my family were all on their way, each of them expecting a very different version of me than the one Gloria was protecting. By the time they arrived, I was sitting up in bed. My hands were still shaking, partly from the cold, partly from adrenaline. Gloria sat beside me like a quiet shield, her presence steady, grounding. A uniformed police officer stood near the door. A woman in a navy blazer with a CPS badge clipped to her pocket flipped through a folder at the foot of the bed. This wasn't the scene my father had expected. He came in first. He looked irritated, not worried, like he'd been dragged out on a work night for something unnecessary. His eyes went straight to me, scanning for guilt, for shame, for a confession that would make this easier. Karen followed right behind him. She looked smaller than usual, her shoulders tense, her mouth pressed into a thin line. The confident concern she'd worn earlier that day was gone. She glanced at the officer, then at the CPS worker, then at Gloria. Something flickered across her face. Fear. They had expected a broken girl, a scared kid ready to admit she was troubled and promised to behave. Instead, they walked into a room full of witnesses. The CPS worker introduced herself. "Maria Santos. I'll be overseeing this case." Case? That word landed hard. My father launched straight into his story. Stolen money, pills, evidence discovered by a worried older sister, a desperate attempt to save his youngest child from herself. Maria listened politely, took notes, nodded in all the right places. Then she asked one question. "Did you verify any of this before expelling your daughter from the home during severe weather?" My father hesitated. "No," he said, "but I trust my older daughter." Karen straightened at that. Gloria shifted in her chair. The officer by the door raised an eyebrow. Maria's pen stopped moving. "Trust is not verification," she said calmly. "And expelling a minor into dangerous conditions without investigation is a serious matter." Karen tried to jump in then, voice soft and trembling. "We just want what's best for her. She's been struggling for years." Gloria leaned forward. "No," she said gently, "she hasn't." Everyone turned to look at her. Gloria adjusted her glasses. "I found this child unconscious on the side of Route 9. No coat, no phone, no one looking for her. I've spent decades working in child welfare, and I know what neglect looks like. This is it." The room went very quiet. That's when I heard heels in the hallway. Vast, purposeful. Before anyone could react, the door opened. My grandmother walked in. Dorothy Reeves was 5'2", silver-haired, and absolutely not in the mood for nonsense. She took one look at me in that hospital bed and went completely still. Then she turned to my father. "What," she said slowly, "have you done?" He tried to explain. She didn't let him finish. "You threw a child into a storm," she said. "Your child, based on rumors and pills that magically appeared." She turned to Maria. "I want emergency custody, tonight." Maria didn't hesitate. "That's already under consideration." My father's face crumpled. "You can't just take her," he said. "I'm her father." Dorothy stepped closer. "You stopped acting like one when you locked the door." Paperwork moved fast after that. Hospital staff, police reports, CPS documentation. At 12:30 a.m., an emergency family court judge approved temporary guardianship. Just like that, my life changed. My father was ordered to have no contact with me pending investigation. Karen stood frozen. She hadn't planned for this. As we left the hospital, my father reached toward me. Dorothy stepped between us without breaking stride. "You don't get to touch her," she said. "You had your chance." She guided me into her old Buick, wrapped another blanket around my shoulders, and started the engine. "Grandma," I whispered, voice cracking, "I don't even have clean clothes." She squeezed my hand. "Honey, I have a Target card. We'll survive." For the first time in years, I slept without fear. 2 weeks later, the phone rang. Maria Santos. "Mrs. Reeves," she said carefully, "we've been reviewing the evidence your son-in-law provided." Pause. The timeline doesn't add up. My stomach dropped. "And we found security footage," she continued. "That tells a very different story." Karen's story was about to collapse. The footage showed exactly who withdrew the money, and it wasn't me. Maria Santos didn't sound surprised on the phone. She sounded precise, like someone lining up pieces that were finally starting to click into place. "The cash your father claimed was stolen," she said, "was $800, correct?" "Yes," my grandmother replied, her voice steady. "That money came from a single ATM withdrawal," Maria continued. "Not months of stealing, one transaction, October 14th, 2:47 p.m. I swallowed. At 2:47 p.m., I was sitting in fifth period chemistry, bored out of my mind and arguing with myself about whether covalent bonds would be on the quiz. "I wasn't anywhere near an ATM," I said quietly. "I know," Maria replied, "because the bank's surveillance footage confirms it." She let that hang for half a second. "The person making the withdrawal was your sister." The room felt suddenly too small. Maria explained everything slowly, methodically, like she'd done this hundreds of times before. The ATM camera had captured Karen clearly. Same jacket, same ponytail, same white sedan parked behind her with the dented bumper. There was no confusion, no grainy shadows, no doubt. Bank records didn't lie. And neither did school attendance logs. Maria had already verified mine. I was clocked present in class until 3:15 p.m., surrounded by 30 students and a teacher who remembered me asking a question that day. Karen hadn't just accused me. She replaced me. And she'd been sloppy. What stunned me most wasn't that she'd done it. Deep down, I already knew that. It was how confident she'd been, how certain she was that no one would look too closely. That night, my grandmother poured herself a cup of tea and sat at the kitchen table, silent for a long time. "She thought you wouldn't fight back," she said finally. She was right. Maria didn't stop at the cash. Next came the pills. The empty prescription bottles that had been found in my closet were traced back to a pharmacy on Oak Street. They belonged to one person. Trent Barlow. Karen's boyfriend. The same boyfriend who always talked about his next big opportunity, his next investment, his next guaranteed win. Maria contacted the pharmacy, then the police. And something interesting surfaced. Trent had reported those pills stolen. 3 days after I was kicked out. 3 days. If those pills had been planted in my room before October 14th, why report them missing on the 17th? Because they weren't stolen. They were planted. And then there was the burner phone. The fake drug dealer texts came from a prepaid phone purchased 4 days earlier at a convenience store, less than 2 miles from Karen's gym. Security footage showed her buying it. Same car. Same dent. Same pattern. Maria laid it all out in a report that grew thicker by the day. Every lie Karen told required 3 more lies to support it, and each one left a paper trail. Then Maria looked deeper. Way deeper. She requested bank statements from my father going back 2 years. That's when the real numbers started to appear. Small checks at first, $50, $100, $200, written to accounts connected to Trent's business ventures. Forged signatures. Amounts that looked harmless alone, but added up fast. Just under $18,000. Karen hadn't framed me to save the family. She framed me to save herself. My grandmother hired a lawyer the next morning. Leonard Vance. He'd known my mother since grade school. When he read Maria's report, his expression hardened. This wasn't panic, he said. This was planning. He filed for permanent guardianship immediately. He also filed civil claims against Karen for fraud, emotional distress, and attempted financial exploitation. And he locked my trust fund down so tightly that not even a court order could touch it without multiple layers of review. Karen still didn't know any of this. She was still walking around like she'd won. Still telling people she'd tried to help her troubled little sister. Still believing the story she'd built was untouchable. Then something happened she couldn't control. Trent got arrested. Not locally. Federal. Nevada. 3 states, 1 scam, over $400,000 stolen. And suddenly, the man who helped plan my destruction was staring down a long prison sentence. People like Trent don't stay loyal when the walls close in. They trade information. And he had a lot to trade. Trent didn't just cooperate. He wrote everything down, including the sentence Karen said that proved she never saw me as a sister at all. Trent didn't hold out long. Federal charges have a way of stripping people down to who they really are. Facing years in prison, he did what men like him always do. He talked. His statement was 12 pages long. Typed, signed, detailed. And it destroyed every lie Karen had built. According to Trent, the plan hadn't been born in panic. It wasn't a heat-of-the-moment decision or a misunderstanding gone wrong. It was deliberate. Karen had been stealing from our father for nearly 2 years, funneling money into Trent's investments. When she realized the missing money would eventually be noticed, she needed a scapegoat. That scapegoat was me. Trent wrote that Karen described me as the perfect target, the quiet one, the difficult one, the sister nobody would believe. She told him that if I were labeled an addict and placed into treatment or institutional care, 2 problems would disappear at once. The theft could be blamed on me, and my trust fund would fall under a guardian's control. Her control. $45,000. That's what she thought my life was worth. Trent confirmed every step. The pill bottles he saved. The burner phone Karen bought. The morning she planted the evidence in my room while I ate breakfast, unaware that my life was being dismantled piece by piece. He included text messages. Dates Times instructions. One message stood out. She won't fight back, she never does. That line hit harder than anything else. Because it was true. Until it was. The district attorney's office got involved almost immediately. With Trent's confession, this was no longer just a family court issue. This was fraud, theft, child endangerment, conspiracy. Karen was arrested quietly. No dramatic scene, no handcuffs in public. Just a knock at the door and a long, silent car ride. The court date was set for March 2012. By then, I had been living with my grandmother for 5 months. I had gained weight, the good kind. The kind that comes from regular meals and sleeping without fear. I had honor roll certificates pinned to my bedroom wall. I had friends who knew me as me, not as a story someone else had written. But walking into that courtroom, I still felt 15. Small, exposed. Grandma squeezed my hand. Leonard nodded reassuringly. Gloria sat in the gallery, watching like she always had. Karen sat across the room with a public defender she'd met that morning. The golden child looked ordinary. Tired, pale. The prosecutor laid it out piece by piece. ATM footage, school attendance records, pharmacy logs, forged checks, security footage, Trent's confession read into the record. Karen tried to stick to her story. It didn't last long. "Ms. Walls," the prosecutor said, holding up a photo. "Is this you at First National Bank on October 14th at 2:47 p.m.? Karen stared at the image. Her face. Her jacket. Her car. "Yes," she whispered. "And you withdrew $800 in cash." "Yes." "For groceries." Silence. The courtroom held its breath. Then came Jolene. My stepmother hadn't planned to testify. But under oath, silence wasn't an option anymore. She admitted she'd seen Karen go into my room that morning. She admitted overhearing Karen on the phone 2 days earlier saying, "Everything is in place." The judge leaned forward. And then my father took the stand. He looked broken. Older. He admitted he never checked the evidence, never asked my side, never questioned the timing. "I trusted her," he said weakly. "She was always the responsible one." The judge's response was sharp. Trust is not an excuse for abandonment. Karen took a plea deal. 2 years suspended sentence, 5 years probation, 200 hours of community service, full restitution of all stolen funds, and a permanent restraining order. She could never contact me again. Never. My father lost custody permanently. He was ordered to pay for my therapy and education until I turned 21. Jolene filed for divorce 6 weeks later. As we left the courtroom, my father tried to approach me. Grandma stepped in front of him without slowing. "You lost the right," she said. I didn't look back. I thought the story ended in that courtroom, but 13 years later, a letter proved I was wrong. For a long time after the trial, I expected peace to feel louder. Like fireworks, like justice ringing in my ears. Instead, it was quiet. The kind of quiet you only notice, after years of noise, finally stop. Living with my grandmother felt unreal at first. Her house didn't have tension humming in the walls. No slammed doors. No whispered accusations. Just the smell of coffee in the morning and the steady rhythm of a life that didn't revolve around fear. She had 3 rules. Breakfast at 8. Homework before television. No nonsense before her second cup of coffee. It was the safest place I had ever known. I started therapy not because I was broken, but because years of manipulation leave fingerprints you don't see until someone points them out. My therapist helped me name things I'd never had words for before: gaslighting, scapegoating, emotional isolation. Understanding didn't erase the past, but it loosened its grip. I went to a new school where nobody knew my last name or my family's history. I made friends who didn't need me to prove I was good. Teachers who saw me as capable, not problematic. For the first time, I wasn't surviving. I was growing. My father tried to call once. Leonard handled it. There were letters after that, apologies written in shaky handwriting, promises to do better. I didn't read most of them. Healing doesn't require reopening every wound. College came and went. I worked 2 jobs, applied for scholarships, lived on ramen and stubbornness. Every milestone felt earned in a way nothing ever had before. And then there was Colin. We met at a charity event I was working. He spilled wine on my dress, apologized like he'd committed a felony, and made me laugh so hard I forgot to be embarrassed. He was kind in quiet ways, the kind of man who listens when you talk, who doesn't raise his voice, who believes you the first time. I chose him the way I learned to choose myself. By the time I turned 28, my life looked nothing like the girl on Route 9. Boston apartment, harbor views, a career I built from the ground up, a partner who never once made me feel disposable. And my grandmother, still sharp, still stubborn, still very much in charge, watched it all with pride. Then the letter came. It arrived at her house, not mine. She called me and said there was something I needed to see. Her voice was careful, neutral, the way it got when she was trying not to sway me. The envelope was thin, plain. The return address read Maple Grove Care Center. I recognized the handwriting immediately. My father. I sat at her kitchen table, coffee going cold in my hands, and opened it. He wrote about the stroke, about losing mobility, about Jolene leaving, about the house being sold, about how Karen had tried to visit and he'd refused to see her. And then the apology. Not the vague kind, the detailed kind. The kind that names harm. He asked to see me. Just once. Before it was too late. I stared at the page for a long time. 13 years of silence pressed down on me. 13 years of learning how to live without him, of becoming whole without his approval. I didn't owe him anything. But forgiveness isn't about owing. It's about choosing. So I went. The nursing home smelled like disinfectant and endings. My father looked smaller than I remembered, shrunken by time, illness, regret. He cried when he saw me. I didn't. I let him talk, let him apologize, let him say my name like it meant something again. Then I said what I came to say. I forgive you, I told him, but forgiveness doesn't erase consequences. I told him about my life, my job, Colin, my happiness. I told him I wasn't carrying his choices anymore. When I left, he reached for my hand. I let him touch my fingers for a moment. Then I walked out. What the nurse told me in the hallway changed the way I understood everything that had happened between my father and my sister. I was halfway down the hallway when the nurse stopped me. She was young, tired, the kind of tired you only get from working around endings every day. You're his daughter, right? She asked gently. The younger one. I nodded. She glanced back toward my father's room, then lowered her voice. Your sister came by last week. He wouldn't see her. I froze. He told us to send her away, the nurse continued. Got pretty upset about it, said he couldn't look at her face anymore. For a moment, I couldn't speak. After all those years, being the one pushed out, the one blamed, the one discarded, it had been Karen who was turned away at the end. Not me. Not because he loved me more now, but because regret is selective. And heavy. I walked out of the nursing home into October sunlight. Same month, different weather, different life. 13 years ago, October meant rain, cold, and survival. Now it meant falling leaves and warm air and the quiet certainty that I had made it through. The drive back to Boston was silent. Not the uncomfortable kind. The resolved kind. When I got home, Colin was waiting. Takeout containers on the counter. A bad movie paused halfway through. He took one look at my face and didn't ask questions. He just opened his arms. "I think I'm done," I said into his shoulder. And I meant it. Some stories don't end with justice. They end with clarity. Karen disappeared from my life after the trial. I heard bits and pieces through distant relatives and public records. Night shifts, short-term jobs, probation meetings. The kind of life built on damage control. My father stayed in that nursing home. We never spoke again. And that was okay. Because closure doesn't always come from reconciliation. Sometimes it comes from walking away without anger. My grandmother's house became the place we planned the wedding. Small, intimate, food over formality. Meatloaf was non-negotiable. As the date got closer, I found myself thinking back to that girl on Route 9, the one who thought survival was the best she could hope for. She didn't know she'd become someone who chose peace. She didn't know storms can redirect instead of destroy. One afternoon, while unpacking boxes in my office, I found the band poster I'd bought the week before everything fell apart. The same one I'd spent my allowance on instead of quarters for a payphone. I framed it. Hung it where I could see it every day. A reminder that even then, I was already becoming myself. People ask me sometimes how I forgave. The truth is, forgiveness wasn't a moment. It was a decision, repeated quietly. Again and again. I didn't forgive to fix my family. I forgave to free myself. Because carrying anger keeps you tied to people who don't deserve your energy. Letting go doesn't mean forgetting. It means choosing where your life goes next. And mine goes forward. What happened to my sister after everything was over still surprises people, and it taught me one final lesson about consequences. People assume karma looks dramatic. Explosions, public apologies, lives collapsing in real time. Most of the time, it doesn't. Most of the time, consequences are quiet. They arrive slowly, persistently, and without an audience. After the court case, Karen faded out of my world completely. The restraining order made sure of that. No messages, no accidental run-ins, no apologies whispered through relatives. Just absence. At first, that absence felt strange. For so many years, my life had been shaped around her shadow, avoiding her moods, anticipating her reactions, shrinking to stay safe. When that shadow vanished, there was an emptiness I didn't expect. Not grief. Adjustment. I heard about her in fragments. Second-hand stories passed carefully, like no one wanted to disturb something already fragile. She bounced between jobs that required background checks and didn't like what they found. Financial work was off the table. Anything involving trust, money, or responsibility quietly closed its doors. Probation meetings became the structure of her life. Community service filled weekends she used to spend feeling superior. Nights were long, opportunities short-lived. She never reached out. And I never waited. My father's decline was slower, lonelier. The nursing home became his world. Friends stopped visiting. Church connections faded. Jolene had built a new life that didn't include explanations. Regret stayed. It always does. I didn't visit again. Not because I hated him, but because healing doesn't always require revisiting the wound. My grandmother understood that instinctively. She never pushed, never suggested I be the bigger person. She believed in boundaries long before they were fashionable. You don't owe anyone access to you, she used to say. Not even blood. That sentence rewired something in me. The closer the wedding got, the more I noticed how different my life felt from the one I escaped. No chaos. No manipulation. No fear disguised as love. Colin noticed it too. He never rushed me, never questioned my instincts. When I told him pieces of my past, he listened without trying to solve it. That was new. Love without conditions is quieter than people expect. It doesn't demand proof. It doesn't test loyalty. It just stays. A month before the wedding, I received one final piece of information about Karen. She tried to apply for a position at a nonprofit, working with at-risk youth. She didn't make it past the background check. The irony didn't escape me. The system that once failed to protect me now protected others from her. That felt right. Not satisfying. Just right. The wedding day was warm, clear skies, October behaving itself for once. My grandmother walked me down the aisle. She wore navy blue and held my arm like she'd been preparing for this moment her whole life. When we said our vows, I felt something settle inside me. Not triumph. Completion. This was the life that night on Route 9 almost took from me. And yet here I was. People sometimes ask if I ever regret not confronting Karen again. I don't. Because the opposite of revenge isn't forgiveness. It's indifference. She no longer has a role in my story. And that's the harshest consequence of all. The last lesson this story taught me didn't come from my sister or my father. It came from the girl I used to be. I think about her sometimes. The girl I used to be. 15 years old, standing on a porch in October rain, backpack on her shoulders, heart pounding so hard it felt like it might crack her ribs. She didn't know what betrayal really was yet. Not in the way that leaves bruises you can't see. Not in the way that teaches you silence instead of trust. She thought survival was the goal. She didn't know she was walking toward a life. For a long time, I hated that version of myself. Not because she did anything wrong, but because she reminded me of how powerless I once felt. I avoided thinking about that night, avoided October rain, avoided the memory of wet sneakers and headlights rushing past without slowing down. But healing changes perspective. Now, when I think about her, I feel something else. Respect. Because she kept walking. She didn't know a retired CPS worker would stop her car. She didn't know her grandmother would go to war for her. She didn't know the lies would unravel, or that justice would show up wearing cardigans and sensible shoes. She just knew she couldn't stop. And that mattered. People like to talk about strength as if it's loud, as if it announces itself. But real strength is quiet. It's walking forward when nobody believes you. It's telling the truth, even when silence would be safer. It's choosing not to become the thing that tried to destroy you. I didn't win because my sister lost. I won because I refused to disappear. Karen didn't ruin my life. She exposed the truth about who deserved access to me. My father didn't break me when he locked that door. He showed me that love without accountability isn't love at all. And my grandmother, my anchor, my proof that good people exist, she taught me something I carry every day. Family isn't who shares your blood. It's who shows up when the storm hits. I still live in Boston. I still wake up early and drink my coffee by the window. Sometimes it rains. And when it does, I don't flinch anymore. Because rain doesn't scare me. I survived worse. If you're listening to this and it feels familiar, If you've ever been blamed for something you didn't do, discarded because someone else's lie was more convenient, hear this. You are not crazy. You are not weak. And you are not disposable. Someone else's cruelty does not define your worth. And the chapter where you were hurt is not the chapter where your story ends. That girl on Route 9 thought she was being punished. She was being redirected. Away from manipulation. Away from conditional love. Away from people who needed her small so they could feel big. And toward a life she couldn't yet imagine. Some storms don't destroy you. They reveal the road. If this story moved you, you're not alone. More stories like this are already on your screen. Choose one. Because sometimes hearing how someone else survived reminds you that you can too. And if you're still walking through your storm, keep going. The road doesn't end where you think it does.